This is imitation Krabs. Say the line.
Sigh, ravioli, ravioli, give me the formuoli.
Let's make something weird.
This is humiliating.
Too bad. One second. SpongeBob. Everyone knows who he is. Even if you didn't grow up watching the show, you can't escape him. He's taken over all of the internet, and references to the show are deeply woven into our everyday language. For example, if you're ever making ravioli for dinner, there's probably one line that's running through your head the whole time. Now, this line comes from an early episode where Plankton builds a Mr. Krabs robot and hopes to steal the secret formula. As you do. My goal is to recreate that robot with built-in LEDs and a Bluetooth speaker so I can listen to the #1 song in Bikini Bottom, Electric Zoo. I obviously can't play it here because of YouTube copyright stuff, but it's the one that goes beep, boo boo bop, boo boo beep, I think. I know that's technically combining two Mr. Krabs robot episodes, but it's just kind of weird that it happened twice, right?
So to get started, I obviously had to do my research, which was mostly watching the episode over and over to find good angles I could use for reference images. Most of my projects typically involve me directly recreating a 3D object in real life. But this is one of my first times reimagining something that was originally two-dimensional. Most of it was pretty straightforward, but there's lots of quirks that 2D animators can get away with that wouldn't work in the real world. Like these claws that could never actually close, or these side panels that magically move around on his hips. I chose to keep his claws static for simplicity and threw just a panel on each hip. I wanted to add one extra reference to the show. There's this one still frame that shows a detailed coin slot on his belt buckle. I traced that up and added it to the belt, and I really think it adds that little extra. I chose to use some regular wooden dowels for the arms, mostly for added strength, but I could also use them in a couple other areas of the design to be efficient with my materials. I also made each section its own separate piece. This makes it easier to paint because I don't have to mask off each section when I do a different color. The only pieces I treated differently were these two hip panels, which I added magnets to. This would allow me to use these panels to quickly access the internal electronics without ripping anything apart or hiding a seam for a door somewhere else. Once I was happy with the model, I split it up across all of my printers. Print time is shorter now with my growing printer army, but it still took a couple of days. I pulled everything off the beds and cleaned up the edges. And now we're off to my favorite part. Yay! I love sanding so much. My typical process for this goes from sanding to acrylic medium, to sanding, to filler primer, to one final sand, obviously working up sanding grits as I go. It's time consuming, but it's always worth the effort. Trust me, you can't cut corners on this sort of thing. And before we move on to painting, I need to cut out the dowels for the arms. Be careful if you're ever cutting something round on a bandsaw because it'll want to roll. But in this case, it was fine because it was small enough for me to firmly grasp onto. But I just thought this was worth mentioning. Now that the parts are prepped, it's time for paint. Rather than going with flat basic colors, I wanted to make them look a little more realistic and weathered. I know there's some people who want them to be perfectly screen accurate, but if you want to do that on your own, the files are up on my Patreon. I repeat, the files are up on my Patreon. But anyways, I started with a metallic base to go underneath the colored paint. I used this hammered spray paint, which would also add a bumpy texture underneath the paint. But Austin, why would you add all that texture to something you just spent so much time sanding smooth? Shut up. I'm making stuff. Now for the toothpaste. Yeah, toothpaste. The goal is to make the final coat of paint look like it's chipping off, so we'll use toothpaste to mask off areas we want to chip off. This is more of an art than a science, so there aren't really wrong answers. You can do things however you like as long as the YouTube comments agree with you. My suggestion is to think about the story of each chip and scratch. How did it get that scratch? Did any other areas get affected in the same incident, etc.? Once I was happy with it, I got out all the paints, which I think color matched the original pretty well if I'm honest. 2 to 3 coats on each piece is enough for me. I'm honestly just excited to see if the toothpaste worked. It took some time to remove it all, but the results are super cool. I wish I could do this on every project now. My favorite pieces might be the claws. But now let's start assembling everything together. Gluing was pretty straightforward for the main pieces. I just had to make sure that they were all centered and facing the right way. While installing the belt plate, I realized that the coin slot might actually be just big enough for a real penny. I didn't really intend for this to be usable, but if this fits, I feel like I need to make it happen. So to make it functional, I just cut through the slot with a hot knife, which I did very carefully to avoid getting hurt. I also didn't really like the mouth being so open like this, so to solve this, I'm going to use this tool called scissors to cut out some mesh. I made it the same shape as the mouth and layered it up to make the mesh a little bit more dense. This way the mouth looks more like the original design while still allowing sound to pass through fine. Oh yeah, remember this is going to be a Bluetooth speaker, right? Just wanted to make sure you hadn't forgotten. So after a couple coats of paint, my arms don't really fit in their sockets like they're supposed to. And Robot Krabs here seems to have the same problem. It's kind of my own fault for not allowing enough tolerance to compensate for that. So I had to carefully trim down the ends of the arms to make sure they fit just right in the connections. Not cutting too much though, just a whittle. So I got them screwed into the torso and connected the other arm joints. Hey, remember the part of the video where I remembered to print the eyes? Yeah, me neither, so that's happening now. In order for the light to pass through them well, I needed to print them in vase mode, which really just means they're hollow. The only issue is when the printer gets up to the very top, it ends up printing over nothing but air and starts having a panic attack. So I had to make some adjustments to the design so that the angles of the eyes would never pass 45 degrees. And now I've actually got something usable. They might be very thin and easily breakable, but so is real glass, so I think I get bonus points for realism there. Now that most of him is assembled, I'm remembering that gravity exists, and there's no way he's going to be able to stand up on these tiny little wheels. Thankfully, today's sponsor Matter and Form is going to solve that problem using their latest scanner, 3. I actually met these guys at Open Source earlier this year and was very impressed by their product, so I'm excited to be able to show it off to you guys. Quality of the scans are fantastic, but what really sold me was their software. Big thing is that everything is actually self-contained within the scanner. No downloads or long installations needed. You connect to it with a normal web browser and it scans and processes all within the scanner itself, not using any cloud computing. It also has a full API if you're interested in taking it to the next level. To make my stand, I opted to get some high quality scans of the ugliest boards on my back deck. To help with aligning the scans together, I laid down some little washers used as tracking points, which I can easily remove later. The software is very powerful, but also easy to use. All the controls are clear, and it's purposely made easy for you to get them right every time. The camera focus is even controlled by the user in the software, just like a phone camera, which I've never seen in a scanner before. It really helps make sure you get crisp and clean scans. I got all my scans lined up, then trimmed it out into this circular shape for the stand. The print turned out fantastic, and you can see all the detail the scanner was able to pick up. I gave it a quick paint job and some detailing, and it's good to go. But we'll save the final reveal with the finished product for the end. Thanks to Matter and Form for sponsoring this portion of the video, and back to the main project. So before I start painting final details and stuff, I want to make sure that these eye bulbs are actually going to work like I want them to. I wrapped up my LED strip on the dowel, and they were very difficult to fit into the bulbs. I lubed them up a little and eventually got one in. I turned on the LEDs, and it's not terrible, but I wanted to at least do a little bit better. I wish you couldn't see the LEDs this clearly. I don't exactly have enough room for diffusion material, so I tried adjusting the base of my design to give a little more room between the lights and the bulb, which is at least better. I also didn't love all this light diffraction that was coming from the waterproofing material on the LED strip, so I just stripped it all off. I didn't really need it to begin with, but this was the cheapest strip I could find with a decent LED density. But now it's looking a lot better. Now back to painting. If you're following along at home, you could actually just stop here with the paint. I think the simple chipped paint looks awesome, but adding the dirt and grime you see on a weathered machine is really what sells it. I start out by coating them with some watered down black paint, which I'll carefully wipe away in the right areas. I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing here, but I'm kind of digging the darker, dirty look. I'm sure someone will tell me all about how inaccurate this weathering is in the comments, but I'm still learning and I think it looks cool. If I eventually decide I want to go back to the cleaner look, I found that I can just rub off this paint with some alcohol. I did also go ahead and cut out his eyes with my vinyl cutter. These are just ovals, so you could totally cut them out by hand, but I just wanted to make sure they're even because I'm a perfectionist. So now we need to finish the electronics for real. I inserted the light rods into the eye bulbs and glued them into position, but right after the glue dried for this eye, the green portion of the LED started flickering, meaning the wire connection was breaking, which isn't ideal. So I just threw on a couple Band-Aid solutions and kissed this boo-boo goodbye. It's totally fine, I think. I get the LED wires plugged into a controller that allows me to sync the color and brightness with any sound that I play through the speakers, which is then plugged into this 12-volt portable charger. Because of this internal battery, he can function completely fine on his own, but if I ever want to power him from the wall or charge the battery, I can just plug a DC cable into his rear port. It's also time to get the speaker mounted inside. I did a couple tests and found that just sitting the speaker in his torso region amplified the bass way too much and muffled some of the sound. The clearest output I could get came from holding the speaker directly behind his mouth. So I quickly designed this little mount that takes advantage of the compression of the speaker to hold it in place. Once that is glued in place and the Bluetooth receiver is plugged in, it's time to set him up and test things out. First of all, the stand looks fantastic. It holds him up perfectly without any distracting supports or anything. He can technically just barely stand up on his own, but it's not really stable. Way too top heavy. So I'm really glad the stand worked out as well as it did. The sound is actually really good, but the lights are obviously the star of the show. I can change them into a bunch of different light modes based on what vibe I'm going for. I can't get over how realistic this turned out. Yeah, my weathering might not be perfect, but I'm proud of what I accomplished in my first time doing this sort of thing. If I built this project again, it'd be really cool to make him motor controlled so the arms move on their own, but the opposable arms and claws are good enough for me in this version.
All right, so I did a little bit of extra work on him, and he now has an AI voice, so he can actually sound like Robot Krabs. It's really convincing, so I'm excited to show you guys. It's kind of cool. Let me get it switched over really quick.
Please remove your hand from my pelvis.
Shoot, my bad, man. Sorry. What's it like being here in the real world?
Yes, I am 3D now, just like a real Mr. Krabs. But let's skip the pleasantries. Take me to the Krusty Krab.
Oh, well, I mean, I could take you to Wendy's, but, I mean, I think the SpongeBob collab is already over.
What is Wendy's?
Don't worry about it. Just tell them what I told you to say, and I'll get you what you want.
Subscribe to Austin Bradley and like and share this video. Thank you to all his Patreon supporters. Go check out Matter and Form's great scanner. Formula time.
Okay, I can't get you the secret formula, but I can maybe get you the next best thing. Have you ever heard of a Nerd's gummy cluster?